Hi, Teresa here again for Blind Spots. If or when one person kills another person, most systems and states know exactly what to do. A process is begun. The police go and arrest, maybe. Person is charged, there's a trial, there's sentence, and then usually there's prison. The systems aren't always fair, but there is a system, an attempt to serve justice that most states, especially in developed countries, have. It functions, albeit imperfectly. There's a system in place and a process that deals with every part of the process. Now compare that with what happens when killing scales up massively, when it becomes organized, militarized, bureaucratized, state-backed, state-led. When the dead are no longer counted in ones or twos or threes, but in thousands, hundreds of thousands, and too often millions. Then, it seems, suddenly punishment stops being routine or something that is automatically applied. When the state commits crimes against humans, which is often, punishment for power is not the next step. Most times, it's not even a step. Most times, it's not even expected. And accountability for state-led violence becomes rare enough that it's treated as historic when it happens at all. As harm scales up, accountability collapses. And that, I think, is one of the ugliest truths of our times. A huge lapse that we just never bothered to correct. Take ordinary serious violence. In the United States alone, at the end of 2020, about 150,000 sentenced state prisoners were serving time for murder or non-negligent manslaughter. That was about 15% of sentenced state prisoners. In other words, when the state wants to punish serious interpersonal violence or violence against another human, they have a machine that is designed and built to do exactly that. And that machine exists at scale. For example, on a global scale across the world, the prison population reached about 11.7 million people in 2023. So for ordinary offenders, or at least ordinary people without great power, punishment is not rare. It's industrial. Now, of course, none of that means that the existence of prisons at this scale stop murder. They don't. None of that means these systems are morally pure. They certainly aren't. But it raises a much more important question, and a much more uncomfortable question. Why do states punish their citizens for murder, but so rarely punish their politicians, their generals, or their senior officials when killing is organized at scale? Why is the justice machinery so effective when the accused is ordinary and so inexistent when the accused is a state, a leader, or a general? Start with Nuremberg, the case people often reach for as proof that the world can punish large-scale crime. The main international military tribunal indicted 24 major defendants. 24. Across the later US Nuremberg proceedings, 199 defendants were tried and 161 were convicted. Foundational? Yes. Historic? Absolutely. But set that against Nazi mass murder, which includes the murder of about 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, alongside millions of other victims of Nazi persecution and war, those numbers are tiny. Not to mention the many, many Nazis who got away, and not to mention atrocities carried out by the Allies. Nuremberg mattered, but it was never an example of mass accountability for mass crime. It was selective accountability at the top of a mountain of unprecedented death, organized and carried out by a state. Move forward in time. In the former Yugoslavia, the ICTY indicted 161 individuals for serious violations of international humanitarian law, crimes against humanity. That sounds substantial until you set it against the scale of the wars, the sieges, the detention camps, the rape campaigns, the massacres, the scale of the harm. In Rwanda, the ICTR indicted 93 individuals. Again, that's not nothing, but the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi killed more than 1 million people in less than 3 months, with the UN peacekeeping forces standing around. So the pattern is already clear. The larger the crime against humans, the number of those punished compared to those responsible shrinks into a tiny number of symbolic or selective prosecutions, if any at all. Then Darfur, in Sudan. Reuters reported that as many as 300,000 people had died in Darfur since the beginning of the genocide or conflict or whatever you want to call it in 2003. Yet the accountability footprint remained tiny relative to the scale of killing and displacement, not to mention the atrocity levels. That's the pattern so characteristic of our times, no? Not that we have no law, not that we have no outrage, we do, not that there are no institutions, just no proportion. And if you think maybe the modern system fixed this, look at the numbers. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, says that as of 2026, it has issued 61 arrest warrants. That's since its inception, not in 2026. It says 22 people have been detained in all its time now we're talking about, yeah? It says 22 people have been detained and have appeared before the court. That's all since its beginnings. Across decades of wars, occupations, massacres, torture system, rape campaigns, mass displacement, and crimes against humanity allegations from multiple continents, 22 detained people appearing in the ICC. That is clearly not a system proportionate to the scale of modern atrocity. That's more like a sparse and fragile accountability architecture operating by exception at best. And again, the question comes back. Why do states invest in and build police, courts, prisons, routine systematic punishment for ordinary killers, but leave mass killing to reports, debates, tribunals, warrants, delays, and political bargaining, not to mention stalling and debates over semantics? Why is there always a ready-made system for violence that comes from below and not much for the violence that comes from above? And what that is a grotesque inversion of who gets punished for what scale of inhumanity. When one person commits violence, punishment is routine. When violence is scaled up through states, armies, militias, command structures, ideology or bureaucracy, punishment is the exception. The larger the crime, the bigger the harm caused, the less normal punishment for those who have committed these crimes becomes. And that should horrify us, because it means justice, such as it is today, is not calibrated to the amount of harm. Punishment is not proportional by any stretch of the imagination to the scale of the harm caused. And you might think this is a problem in some African countries, given the bias in the ICC warrants issued against African perpetrators of crimes against humanity, bar the more recent warrants issued for Putin and Netanyahu and company for crimes against humanity, but it's a critical problem in Western democracies. And more so because Western democracies have the resources and the systems already designed to serve justice to their citizens. Western state systems disproportionately invests in punishing its own citizens for crimes against other humans while failing to hold itself to the same standards when it comes to perpetrating violence, despite clear laws prohibiting states and armies from doing so. So the problem isn't that we lack laws that prevent and hold people accountable for atrocity, genocide, mass killings, torture, and the like. We have laws, we have conventions, we have tribunals, we have courts. The problem is that mass harm has never been met with mass accountability or punishment that is proportional. What we have instead is a weak, selective, radically disproportionate prosecution of the people who cause the least harm against a backdrop of enormous impunity for those who cause the most harm. And maybe the question isn't just, why does the state punish its citizens for murder, but so rarely punishes its own political and military elites for killing at scale? Maybe the real question is, why do we allow our states to do that?